What's the most dangerous risk you've taken? There was this mountaintop, maybe 600 meters in the jungles of Vietnam, up by Hue City, with a triple canopy that never defoliated. There was a higher mountain nearby that had a radio relay site on it. They had reported exactly no enemy activity anywhere within their wide angle view. We were looking for a mountaintop that would give us artillery access to the whole Bow River Valley, where intelligence had decided there must be North Vietnamese army base camps for 2 or 3 divisions that had briefly captured Hue City during Tet. We, a South Vietnamese infantry battalion, some American quote-unquote advisors, and me, were supposed to set up on the mountaintop and provide artillery support for the rest of our unit, which was going into the river valley the next day to rouse those base camps. The Air Force dropped a giant daisy cutter on top of our mountain, which was supposed to clear enough lumber to give us some place to land. I was on the first helicopter of the first gaggle, 6 choppers, because I was the artillery guy and I needed to get on the ground ASAP. The Air Force had left shafts of tree trunks all over the place, so we ended up hovering while the helicopter pilots found a place that would accommodate a maximum of 2 choppers. While they were looking for a landing space, I was viewing the hilltop. The whole damn hilltop was covered in man-made fighting positions. I could see bunkers at the edge of the tree line. The top of the mountain was lined with spider holes, foxholes. Somebody had intended to defend this hilltop. Crap. I phoned it in. Not possible. I must be mistaken, said the American advisors. Meanwhile, the gaggle of helicopters were seeing the same thing. They became anxious to put their loads on the ground and scoot. They decided they could fit 2 helicopters between the shattered tree trunks, and down we went. I could see more fighting positions as we got closer. This was bad. The choppers couldn't get down all the way, so they wanted us to jump out at about 2 meters up. You gotta be kidding me. Deep breath, bail out. I hit the mat of vegetation, okay, walked a foot, and fell into a spider hole. It was hard to crawl out again. This was crazy. It turned out that the North Vietnamese division-sized base camp was all around our landing zone. The guys in the river valley found nothing but muck and leeches. Fortunately, the camp was deserted except for a cater of NVAs maintaining the mess halls and hooches and well-organized water-used areas. It was a really nice base camp under the triple canopy jungle. We lucked out. The people who built it met their end at the Battle of Hue. If anyone had been home, we would have been out of luck. That moment, squatting on the skid step of a UH-1B, hanging onto the bulkhead, staring down at conclusive evidence that someone had gotten everything backward, and that we were the ones who were going into the NVA base camp, I took a deep breath, muttered a kind of army prayer, and said, screw it, and jumped. You know, just about everything you do involves a risk, but that one, I did not expect to survive. Memorable. Story 2. Not a traditional risk, but probably adopting our son when we had a million reasons to say no. A little over 13 years ago, my wife and I got a call from our adoption agency asking if we would be interested in an adoption situation that just came up. We did want to adopt again, but we got the call a little earlier than we expected and the baby was already here. We didn't know much about him other than that he was born premature, had a heart defect, little information on how severe, and that his birth mom wanted to close the adoption. We also had an 18-month-old daughter at home, and my wife was at work when they called. We had limited time to make the decision, and my wife and I talked it through when she was on a break. We decided that there was every reason to say no and so few reasons to say yes, but we said yes anyway, even though it made little sense at the time. I'm thankful for that decision every single day. Our family is perfect the way it is, and my son brings so much joy to our family. He's the kind of kid who motivates everyone to be a better person. His heart defect was corrected in infancy and he's doing great other than the annual exam to check on things. He competed in a youth triathlon this summer and is playing football at the moment, despite being much smaller than his teammates. He's planning on running a 5K in a couple of weeks. He's high energy and always out doing something. My kids are very close as siblings and I truly couldn't imagine a world where one was without the other. The smart decision would have been to decline, but I'm grateful every day we took the risk. My wife and I are not saviors or special people. We were people who wanted to have children and got that. Circumstances forced us into a different avenue, but it's not better or worse than other methods of adding to your family. We were fortunate enough to be able to parent 2 awesome kids who have become 2 amazing teenagers. It doesn't take a special person to adopt, it just takes someone who wants to be a parent. Now, that is so awesome. And as much as the parents would say that they're lucky to have their kids, I've no doubt that their own kids would say the same thing about being lucky to have their mom and dad be exactly who they are. Story 3. Where do I even start? I love doing risky things. I get a thrill out of it. Tinder is the worst app ever invented for someone like me. When I traveled to Alaska alone, I started messaging someone immediately when I touched down in Anchorage. He picked me up and brought me 3+ hours out into the Alaskan wilderness, telling me about a huge party out there where they light cars on fire and dance in the mud. 100% true. It was one of the best parties I've ever been to. The dude got too tipsy to drive me back to my hotel, and some army guys gave me and another girl I'd been hanging out with there a ride back to the city. We all crashed in my hotel room, completely covering the place in Alaskan suit. I have a $5,000 camera that I keep on me at all times. When I was staying in Chicago with some friends and one of them pissed me off, I took off into the city to go take pictures by myself. Walking around Wacker Drive at 3 a.m., hobos hooted at me and tipplers approached me. I hid my camera the whole time. Actually, that night ended up being pretty fun. I walked out of a bar, bored and ready to go back to my friends, and as I did, I saw a very handsome man, all alone, walking in. I said hi, went back to his hotel room, and we partied all night. I still have great photos from his 100% paid for top floor suite at some fancy hotel. I should remember the name because it's super historical and I walk by it every time I'm in Chicago, but I don't. I moved to Peru with $2,000 in my name. One night there, I'd been out with all my friends at the club, and surprise, surprise, something made me mad, and I took off to walk home 2 miles-ish through the city in my clubbing clothes. I started getting followed about 5-ish blocks from my apartment and started running around 3. Luckily, I'm a fast runner. I cried myself to sleep that night, thinking about what could have happened to me and wondering why I do these things. Okay, so if OP ever becomes a contestant on The Amazing Race, for example, my bet is on her that she'd win it all. She's a risk taker, obviously, and a frickin' survivor, and still keeps at it. Story 4. I went to see Tool by myself in a city 5 hours away from my home city. I got to talking to these 2 very nice fellas sitting in front of me and even hung out with them a bit after the show while one went to get his t-shirt. They were kind enough to walk me to my car, so I accepted their invitation to go back to their hotel with them for a couple of drinks. They wanted to pick me up at my hotel, but I refused and insisted on driving myself. No one who knows me or cares about me had any idea where I was or that I was even out of town going to a show by myself. As I walked through the parking lot of the hotel, it occurred to me what a stupid and dangerous thing I was about to do. My mother would be so upset if she knew. It was fine, nothing untoward happened. They were really nice, kind, and decent gentlemen who behaved themselves. I drank maybe 1 beer. One of them was ex-military and also an ex-cop. The other was a current active small-town cop. The cop was nice enough to do a little sobriety test before I left to make sure I could get back to my hotel okay. I did. The ex-cop packed my bowl for me when he returned it, which I never even noticed until I was like halfway home when I decided to stop for a little break and, oh, would you look at that? My new friend left me a present. I texted him what a stud he was. We are still Facebook friends, and whenever I pass through that town, I hit him up and we get coffee or something. Nice dude. The cop dude has some rage issues though, so I quietly ghosted him. It could have turned out ugly, but it didn't, so it was super risky, but in the end, it was just a nice story about making some new friends at a show. Story 5. I got really tipsy one night, then tried smoking while in that state for the first time ever. At the time, I was young and had a very low tolerance for both booze and grass. Despite this, I made the reckless decision to drive my car on icy roads for 40 minutes at 4 a.m. to go play Call of Duty Zombies at my friend's house. Luckily, there were no other cars or law enforcement on the roads. I ended up swerving across the entire highway, fluctuating my speed between 5 and 50 miles per hour. Another time, I took my first dab from a massive oil rig at a dealer's place. Instantly, everything turned white, and I could only vaguely perceive people's faces as smudges. The next thing I knew, I was back home. I had dropped off all my friends and driven back with absolutely no recollection of it, most likely just going straight to sleep. Then there was a time I drove home with 4 people while we were all experiencing the effects of a certain substance. It was during the onset, but I was definitely affected. On that same night, I took another risk by going upstairs from the party basement to get snacks when I knew my mom was there. She noticed something off about my behavior as I crawled up the stairs and I just blurted out that I took something. Looking back, I realized how foolish I was. There's a period of possibly 4 to 8 months that's a complete blank because of my dependence on an ADHD medication. I can't even recall how long the memory gap was. All I remember is that I skipped school due to depression and a case of mono, resorting to using and playing Halo 3 all day. It got to the point where I could use a substantial dose and still fall asleep. I took too many risks with my life back then. So, this story is like a guide to how to stupidly cheat death and still get away with it. I'd say OP is down to 3 lives left? What's your account? Story 6. I fought this guy who came to view my apartment, which I was subletting when I was 23. Like an idiot, I was showing it to people alone. This dude made an appointment, showed up the next day, and then grabbed me when we got to the bedroom, pushed me down, and told me to just do what he said. I don't know why, but that just instantly pulled me out of my shock and fear. All I was thinking was that I might get hurt, but he's not doing anything to me without a fight. We ended up tussling for 15 or 20 minutes, and somehow I slid enough out from under him to grab onto one of the bedposts and eventually get onto the floor. Miraculously, he didn't do any more harm than that. After a while, I could feel him getting frustrated, and I just started talking. "You don't need to do this, man. Please, my brother just passed away. If anything happens to me, it'll break my parents too. Please, just go." And eventually this dude said, "Okay, but if you tell anyone, I'll come back and shut you up." And I heard his footsteps leaving the room. I waited a minute, then got up and walked through the apartment to go lock the door. Then I called the police. It's probably the biggest risk I've ever taken to resist a guy who was trying to harm me, but I'm glad I did it. That was intense. I was super scared for the OP, but hey, they took the risk and it paid off, so good for them. Now, if you're loving the thrill of these stories so far, please do take a quick second to hit the like and subscribe buttons for your daily dose of interesting content. Story 7. My best friend and I used literally every last dollar we had in college to buy some psychoactive meds. We decided to take them at our favorite dive bar, which did not go well. She spent most of the night in the bathroom while I was sitting alone, seeing things. Some men came up to me, probably just to hit on a single gal, but honestly, they just looked like gremlins and I was visibly afraid. A guy friend at the bar even came over to check on me because, by the look on my face, these men scared the hell out of me, but it was most likely completely innocuous. Anyway, the bar closed and the college safe ride had an over 2-hour wait. This was before Uber and we had no money for a cab. We were sitting on the sidewalk outside the bar trying to figure out what to do. We called everyone in town we knew for a ride, and everyone was out of town or not answering. We were desperate to get home and saw some guys getting into their cars in the street in front of us. So we got up and explained how we were stranded and needed a ride. A large man passing by heard our dilemma and grabbed my friend by her arm and insisted he would take us home. Out of instinct, I trusted the other guy in front of us, and in a tug-of-war style, I pulled my friend into the other stranger's car with me. He told the large man to go away. We didn't know the other guy at all, but he was the lesser risk, and we took it. He turned out to be really nice, and I'll always be thankful to him for getting us out of a sketchy situation. Story 8. I was young and coming back from an overnight stay at home. I was staying in a psych ward at the time. The nurse who handed me the medication said, "These are your overnight meds," but I opened the bag and found like 10 tablets with no markings inside. I had to decide whether I'd trust what the nurse had told me the day before, that there was only 150 milligrams in the bag, or go with my instincts of, no, she wouldn't divide up my medication like this because 10 times 15 milligram tablets is a finicky thing to do. However, since this nurse had told me and she'd already given me the meds for the day before, I decided to trust her and I took all 10. I started feeling really sick, and by the time I got back to the psych ward, I was drifting, so my mom talked to the head nurse. The dumb nurse who gave me the meds had actually given me a full week's worth of medication, meaning I'd taken times 7 the amount of medication I needed. I was rushed out of my room in a wheelchair and then to the hospital, where I spent some time in intensive care, almost fading throughout the night. My BP kept yo-yoing. Had I decided to just not say anything about how sick I was feeling, it was nearing night when I got back to the psych ward, I would have passed away, and the nurses wouldn't have known until the next morning when I didn't wake up, because their routine checks only check that you're in bed, not that you're alive, or else you'd be woken up every 20 minutes. Story 9. I rode a 50cc moped 35 miles each way between two towns in deer country, often at night and usually in dangerously cold conditions for 5 years, totaling close to 20,000 miles. It sucked. Most people never even saw me. Kids like to throw cans and bottles. Once I had a guy move out to pass me just as we approached a doe and a fawn in the road, in fog. He had the clear lane, but he hit the brakes, forcing me to thread the needle between the mom and the fawn. Another time, my brakes overheated coming down a mountain. As I stood there waiting for it to cool, one of the biggest bears I've ever seen wandered by and stopped to check me out. Bigger dogs could actually catch you as you passed. I laid it down in a turn once, was run off by the road innumerable times, and once had my side view mirror tapped out of place by a passing dually. Years afterward, I was explaining to a fellow who knows better that the first half hour of the 90-minute plus ride was the worst because after that, I would stop shivering and sort of fall into a trance. That, he explained, was hypothermia setting in, 5 to 7 nights a week, about 9 months out of the year for 5 years. Hey, I mean, it got me here, and there was no other damn way that was going to happen, so I count myself lucky to have pulled it off and eventually clawed somewhat out of poverty. But I think I ought to be on the other side 1,000 times over. Story 10. I was traveling with a friend and she decided to buy some grass in Cambodia. When we were going back into Thailand, I told her to just get rid of it. She was like, nah, I'll just put it under my shirt. I was slightly worried. Thailand would mess you up if they caught you. When we got to the border, there was a massive sign saying, carrying substances is under capital punishment. I was like, get rid of it. She looked around and saw that there wasn't anyone there, so she said, nah, look, it's empty, we'll be fine. We were shepherded through this corridor, which mazed around to this other outside room with about 6 guys with firearms holding the leashes of sniffer dogs. My heart dropped and I started sweating. I turned to her and was like, what are we going to do? She snapped and said, just keep walking. So we got to the guys who then told us to split, girls on one side, guys on the other. I got sniffed to hell by all the dogs. I looked over and there wasn't a single dog on the woman's side. We walked through and we got back into Thailand. It was the scariest few minutes of my life, and it wasn't even good grass. Funny how times change though, and FYI, Thailand became the first country in Asia to fully decriminalize back in June of 2022. Story 11. I was volunteering at a prison education program discussing books. I was supposed to be leading the conversation, but I let it spin wildly out of control, and somehow the group ends up discussing a forceful act, and specifically, someone says how it's impossible to do that to your partner. I correct that guy, it's absolutely possible. It's about consent, not if you're in a relationship. Another guy says, well, shoot, then I guess I done it to my partner before I got in here. Then my sense of self-preservation completely vanishes for a second in favor of being frank, and I respond totally from the heart. Yes, you have. And if it were up to me, you'd never get out of here. Instantly, I became aware that this is, hands down, the stupidest thing I have ever done. The guy is in for a serious offense himself. He's got like 50 pounds on me and gold teeth. He's 5 feet away with only air between us. The guards are 50 feet away behind a cinder block wall. If he wants to hurt me right now, there is absolutely nothing that's going to stop him. He stared at me for what seemed like an eternity, then he laughed and clapped me on the shoulder. Story 12. I'm a rugby player and was a bank teller in 2009. I'll never forget the date, September 10th, 2009. A group of 5 to 6 burglars stole $47,000 from an ATM while I was doing some maintenance. When they ran out of the branch, every one of them but one went to the right. The idiot who went left was carrying the money bag, and my rugby instincts instinctively kicked in. I ran after him for half a block and tackled him from behind. The look of despair in his eyes when he saw a crazy teller is one of the memories I'll never forget. We tried to fight each other, but with no success. When he realized I wasn't letting him get away with the cash, he threw the bag in the middle of the avenue and ran away. The whole action lasted about 60 seconds, I believe. Afterwards, I couldn't stop thinking, what if? What if he was carrying? What if he had someone waiting for him in the direction he went? My mother got furious, but I got promoted. Good times. Now, these living on the edge moments literally had me on the edge of my seat. Now, since we're on the subject of danger, don't miss out on the next video. What seems harmless but is incredibly dangerous, because sometimes you just won't see it coming. Just listen to story 3. I'll see you there, and thank you for watching this one.